Recording started.
Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to this week's Matrexit discussion group call, as in exiting the Matrix. From Tactical Sovereignty, like I always say, the beautiful first day of the week, not the seventh, not the Sabbath. And what things are and are not, well, that's kind of something we're going to be getting into tonight. We're going to be discussing equity. And I've got a friend of mine, Elle, here with me this evening, and she is calling in over her phone due to bandwidth, but since that's the case and she cannot be here on video, you can see her on the video looking over my shoulder right here. That is Vital. So anyway, welcome this evening. And Vital, why don't you start out and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me. I don't really know what to say about myself other than I am a child of the Most High, a daughter of the Most High, and it's taken me many years to figure out what that means in relation to my life. And I'm just here spiritually in this incarnation to bring about as much truth as I can, and it started internally. It started kind of externally, actually, like the Book of Job, where he gets attacked and all this bad stuff happens. That was kind of what awoke me to the fact that I was living in an illusion and couldn't see what was actually going on in the world. And like any good mom or dad, our Creator sends the adversary to kind of slap us around a little bit to discipline us so that we run back to his throne to figure out who we are.
Absolutely. And, when you say running back to his throne, one of the things that I've noticed in life, and especially, if you just ask something from the Creator, that's not really good enough. It needs to come from deep within your heart. It has to be very well meant. And if I've noticed if you ask him, to give you wisdom and to teach you things, he will put you in a position to where you can learn things. And that very often means getting rid of a lot of the distractions of the world. And I've noticed other people as well that for them, it might even mean them spending 10, 15 years in prison. That puts them on their butt where they have nothing to do but study. And if those events didn't occur, a lot of people wouldn't be able to come forward with very much information just because, they're too distracted. And so we need to be careful sometimes what we ask for, because we very well may get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know it. Thankfully, I wasn't one of those people. I did get put in adult timeout, though. I had everything taken away, and I was so desperate for the truth. Just like, where's the truth? Where's honesty? Where's compassion? Where's real community? Like, what is going on? That I've been very blessed to have the last 3 years to just live off of all of the labor that I had previously, to spend this time to really get to know my Creator, as well as the various different kind of systems, if you will, that are compartmentalized within this big, huge conglomeration of life.
Yeah, and compartmentalized. Doesn't even begin to spell it out, I think. Because I've had a lot of people ask me, well, what should I read? And it's like, well, it depends on what you're trying to find out, what you're trying to learn. They don't produce really a single playbook for you, where you can see everything that's been done and how it's been created and what it's being used for. That just doesn't exist. So, yeah, your reading and research has to be compartmentalized as well. And speaking of which, actually, this last week, I put out an article on WordPress. I believe it's 6 points to it, and it's really compiled of the things I mentioned back in the video, correcting the presumption of status. And what I did is I took those points that I'd mentioned in that video, and I put them in writing and showed what to do, provided links and things like that, because nothing like that has ever been provided anywhere. In fact, that's the type of thing I was looking for years ago when I first started searching. I think we all want to find that one form where you sign on the dotted line and all of a sudden you're free. Well, it doesn't quite work that way
Yeah.
because through life, there's been many steps where we've been kind of tightening the noose around ourselves, and which means going back and undoing some of those contracts or amending them or changing some of those contracts, or maybe even writing brand new contracts, maybe even creating your own legal person and putting theirs on the shelf. But there's a lot that you got to learn along the way. And that, it's one of those things we're going to discuss tonight that is really good to know, is really how the courts got formed and what the equity courts are, which started from the chancery courts, how they relate to statutory or common law, and that kind of thing. So I think I'm going to turn that over to Elle, if you want.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Actually, thank you for everything that you do for people who want to learn, that you give it away for free in your group and your extensive research. I really appreciate that about you. So in this world, there are so many different laws, right? You have the IRS codes, you have the United States Code, the rules of procedure, state laws, constitutions. So the question comes down to the beginning of just what is jurisdiction, right? Who has the authority to do what, where can they do it, and based on what law? And for those who, like for me, it took a really long time to start to unravel these pieces, right? You have your states, and then the state ofs, and so as I started to learn more about the law in Latin, I started to really start. That's when I really started to read the Bible, because I was really desperate. I wasn't raised in a church, so I didn't have any indoctrination or any preconceived ideas. And through reading all of the other codes, because I've read massive codes, UCCs and the Federal Reserve books and all sorts of stuff, I realized that everyone has to have power and has to come from somewhere. And so there was a man by the name, he goes by Ham. He was talking about exclusive equity. And he always had such static. And I really couldn't comprehend what that was because I hadn't been introduced to it. However, I did read in the scriptures where it talks about, like in Psalm 98, that the world will be judged with justice, but the people will be judged with equity. And as I started to study the Bible more, because the Bible is a law book, it's a commerce book. It talks about inheritance, it talks about land, it talks about bonds, suretyship, wills, trusts. So I started to get into trust. That was when I read Robert Michael. And then the question is I started to be like, okay, well, how do these trusts operate? And that was when I learned that there's different kinds of trusts. And so, not to be too long-winded, I started to study the jurisprudence of the American jurisprudence, what the systems of law based in America, the union states as well as state ofs, are based on. And I got turned on to a chancellor, a book that he wrote called A Treatise on Suits and Chancery. And a friend of Lex and I read it, like made an actual audio book of it. And a lot of the language, I just didn't know what they were, maxims and all that. So I had to study more. And so as I followed it back further, it goes all the way back to the time of Rome, right? Like when Rome was occupying Israel and the Messiah was around. And how the praetors out of Rome, because Rome had a republic, right? And it was based on their form of equity, okay? And then as they moved across and conquered Europe, they brought their forms of adjudication. And in England, there was a common law, and the common law, like according to Blackstone, was always the Bible. Well, the Bible, back then, the common law was basically like, we have these remedies over here. We don't care what your rights are. We don't care if you've been wronged. If they don't fit over here, then we can't help you. And the only thing that they could do with that was to provide compensation with money. They couldn't prevent ills from happening or courts from taking jurisdiction. And so the kings, what they did is then they became, the kings were considered the fountain of justice, and they adjudicate their realms based on their laws. And so that was what it was. There you had different branches in England. You had the Admiralty, and then there was the divorce courts and probate. Those were one. And then there was the common courts, and there was the Chancery Court. And the chancellor was ecclesiastical, political, and civil. The chancellor had to know both sides. So that was where the jurisprudence of America's foundation is. And so as the colonists came over here and the private proprietors to set up the plantations over here, they set up equity courts as well as common law, because they really adjudicate on different matters. So like, say someone has a claim like, hey, you've trespassed or you've done this, someone's been wronged in some way. They handle different classifications of rights. So depending on if someone just wants to get money, they can go to common law and at law and get it adjudicated. But if they want to deal with issues of property and how they want restitution that way, it adjudicates on that. So that was the foundation. And then the Judicature Act happened.
Hey, yeah.
And what they did was, I'm sorry, yeah?
Before we go into that act, because, even in regular life, I run into a lot of people that are lost when you say things like adjudication or whatever. So I want to give people a definition of adjudication. And I'll just let everybody know, because people ask this question all the time, what dictionary should you use? What legal dictionary should you use? Generally, just for starting out, I stay with Merriam-Webster's 1828, because you're getting back closer to the date of when a lot of things were written. I believe Supreme Court even uses it. But when it really comes down to it, with various laws, code, or whatever that's written, the only dictionary that really matters is whatever those people were using. So if you're able to find that out, that's the best dictionary to use. But just in a general sense, I suggest staying with the Merriam-Webster's 1828. And adjudication is listed in there as an official decision made by the judiciary. Okay, now, because it has the word adjudicated in it, doesn't mean it only has to come from a judiciary. A school board can even adjudicate a decision. That's the way it's commonly used today as well. But that's what adjudication is. Adjudication means that an official decision has been made regarding a specific issue. And as long as I'm going over that and we're talking about equity, let me give you what Merriam-Webster's 1828 says about equity. It is a system of law originating in English Chancery, comprising of procedural and legal rules and doctrines that aid or override common law and statute law. And people need to realize that within equity, as far as remedy goes, there's three basic types of remedy that is shown within equity law. And those would be 1, specific performance, 2, injunctions, and 3 would be restitution. I think a lot of us are familiar with restitution and didn't realize that is part of equity law. But there's also many other things and that fall under laws of equity, and I'll just run through a short list of those as well, because I know for sure that Elle is going to bring up at least a couple of these. But equitable relief is also found through estoppel, the doctrine of clean hands, doctrine of laches. I think people have heard me speak about the doctrine of laches before. an order of partition, rescission, injunctions, declaratory judgments, and restraining orders. And the majority of maxims actually rest in laws of equity. Go ahead, Al.
Mhm. Yeah, I thank you for that. I like John Bouvier. So John Bouvier says that equity is the soul and spirit of the law, and law is nothing without equity, and equity is everything even without the law, because equity deals with the substance, not the form. And so there are three heads to equity, the English and the American, because American inherited the jurisprudence of equity from England, altered it, and then prior to 1933, when they changed the monetary system, they had to write a way to make legal determinations, so that whenever they did make those changes, that the courts could know how to move forward based on that. And so you have exclusive or inherent equity, concurrent, and auxiliary. But there's also Roman equity. So technically there are four. And so as I started to study equity, I was like, okay, what are maxims? And I realized that the maxims, if people don't know what a maxim is, it's like the courts have been running for, we don't know how many thousands of years, but when something has been determined over and over and over again, that they don't need to be proved. They've been proven enough. These are known. Everyone accepts them. They're binding on the judges. This is what a maxim is. And equity maxims, there are 20. Some say 19, but there are 20. And all laws come out of that. And they trickle down through that. And so I started studying that a whole bunch. And what was interesting is you've mentioned the doctrine of latches, the doctrine of clean hands, conversion. Well, all of those go back to the Bible. And so for me, I was lucky because I wasn't indoctrinated. I had I didn't have to reprogram my brain to read it. And so that was where, for me, I'm like, okay, so now we're looking at a different jurisdiction of law. Because, say someone gets pulled over with a traffic ticket, right? They get an infraction, which is actually a bond that's based on the state. And the state gets its authority from where? And where is the nexus between the man and woman with the state, right? Or where is the man and woman in nexus to the Bible? So it's really about where someone chooses to come from, which jurisdiction that they want to come into. And that's the part where, if you go back, there have been analysis that even the foundation of the United States Code, 67% of the laws that are put on the books for the United States comes from the book of Deuteronomy. You have to have two witnesses, the involuntary manslaughter, bribery, they all go back to the Bible. And so, but that was the interesting thing, because exclusive equity has, they call it the children of equity, okay? And it just so happens that one of them is trust, right? But really what was passed over to these court systems, okay? When people are reading in the Bible, this is the best. I laughed so hard at this. When I realized when they were talking about a temple, I'm like, what are these priests? What do the priests do? Well, they're working with the law of the Creator, the righteous laws. This is how to live in harmony with your family, and how to interact with people who are strangers and not in a covenant trust relationship with you. And this is how, and so it lays out all those things. But I didn't realize that the temple was a courthouse. And I'm like, Brian, they even had a food court. It's so great. It's so awesome. So perfected equity was, what had happened was, there's a lot of power that comes along if you have a bunch of people that can't read or write. And men and women throughout time have been corrupted by the power and wealth, and feeding off of the ignorance of people, people unwilling to in the Bible, they're referred to as stiff-necked. They just don't want to know the truth. And even though the Creator sends outside forces like a mother eagle flapping its wings around, bringing people in circumstances to get attention, some people's hearts just won't be changed. So it's interesting to realize that that equity itself adjudicates issues, and you can read this in Norton Pomeroy. He wrote a 6-volume set called Equity Jurisprudence. There's Spence, Phelps, so many equity writers from the 1800s to the early 1900s. A treatise on suits and chancery, that equity deals with grace. So when someone's reading in the Bible, grace, okay, like Abraham found grace in the eyes of the Creator. Now you're talking about, like real, true equity that's based on the Bible, right? And that was one of the things the Pharisees and the scribes, the lawyers and the magistrates had locked out, and that's what the Messiah came to do. And I hear people talk about grace, but I don't think that a lot of people realize that the Bible is a book on law, and everything in there literally deals with court cases, basically. And it takes someone to be able to decipher what it means, because the Creator always used nature, right? Because we can use our eyes to look out and be like, oh, hey, that's a mountain. And if I'm going to go to war, I'm going to want to be up on top of the mountain because I can see what's happening, right? So, and how it comports over to the Bible is like when he talks about like the Sermon on the Mount. He wasn't like standing on top of a mountain. He was at the highest jurisdiction. And the Messiah was constantly holding court cases. That's what he was doing. But he was using authority and power that that had been locked out to the people, and they weren't teaching it anymore. And that was the switch with the like when he came during the time of the Roman occupation, that the priesthood got, because when you have a new king, you bring in new laws, right? And he basically came back and said, no, I didn't come to abrogate the laws or the prophets, because the prophets are people who speak the word of the Creator that's written in the scriptures. He said, I came to fulfill them. And so he renewed the covenant, and then he went on to expound on certain matters that their teachers were teaching wrong about, like, adultery and revenge and stuff like that. So he expounded on that.
Elle, can we chat about that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so, I mean,
over here.
Since we're bringing up Yeshua, Jesus, and you mentioned the statement of him saying that he came to fulfill the law. I've always thought that people kind of look at that statement a little incorrectly. Maybe wrong, maybe right, I don't know. But I think a lot of times when people see it as he came to fulfill it, that fulfilling of it meant him coming and being the sacrificial lamb. Well, the way I see him fulfilling it is we have to realize that a lot of words don't mean exactly what we think they do, especially today with our 20th century eyes trying to read what the meaning of a first century word or term is. You know what I mean? And to me, for him to fulfill the law, like you said, the people were not following the laws and precepts, concepts that have been put forward, through time, even by the prophets. And so him fulfilling it was him coming back and putting those things back on the table again and saying, hey, guys, you got to get back on track here. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I totally agree, because the laws that are given, like if you go back and you read the food laws, it's so that, and you and I have done a call on this on parasites, the Creator is so magnificent in his design that he created animals that clean up all the nasty stuff from the environment. And so because we have this divine spirit in our temple right now, our bodies, we're supposed to keep them clean from the archons, from the parasites. So every law that he gave, as I started studying them, I'm like, wow, this is just so amazing as I study the laws. And what had happened was Adam and all the people before who went into a blood covenant. See, that's, I think, a lot of, I just got into a discussion with someone on Facebook about this. He was like, wow, it really seemed like that God was blood hungry. And it's like, no, he was actually compassionate, because there's this idea, and it's called subrogation. And when the people with the deed, see, a covenant is different than a trust. Like a trust, if the purpose of the trust is fulfilled, the trust can, it can be settled and reformed or whatever. But a covenant is with a deity, and it's forever. And so oftentimes in the Bible, you'll read King Josiah or Hezekiah is like, and we found the law again, right? And they seek repentance or righteousness, grace, if you will, forgiveness, in a court, not just sitting out in their house, not in some weird building over there collecting money, but actually in an actual court. And then their kingdoms prospered, or, So, but Adam and Eve, or, Adama, they went into this covenantal relationship, and we weren't given all the details of the covenant back then, but they broke it. And so they were under a death penalty. And so that was the cool thing about the Messiah, because he actually could claim the lineage of the actual kinghood, and he was extraordinarily wealthy because he inherited all of the gold and stuff out of Egypt from the prophet Daniel that the Magi, the magistrate, came and gave to him. And so what he did is he chose, because a good king knows that his kingdom only prospers if the people who are subject to his laws have all their needs met and they're living in peace. And so what he chose to do was instead of, and there was even the high priest at the time said it's better that one man die than all of us. And he chose to subrogate because he wasn't under that death penalty. He hadn't trespassed. He wasn't number one, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, right? Well, what is a God? Well, if you look up etymology, a God is someone who people like to think it's one deity, but it isn't. It's actually someone who is a Jew who provides a law for him. Like, these are my laws. So, and that was why he said to Moses, they're going to look at you like you're a God. And later in the Bible, it says, for ye are gods too, because that's what we're supposed to be doing, is figuring out whose laws we're going to follow. And so the Messiah, by doing that, he was able then to make a final atonement with the subrogation for the other people who spiritually choose to become underneath of that covenant again and to renew it. Like Deuteronomy 17:18 says.
Right.
We're supposed to be a royal priesthood. Yeah.
Give us your definition of subrogation.
Well, it's not my definition, but it's basically if you have someone who's a debtor or standing in a position of surety where they have to guarantee, or a grantor, if you will, and they have a duty and a responsibility, they can step into the foot of a creditor, and they can call the bonds and stuff forward from their co-sureties. That's subrogation. It's like someone standing in place of. And they used to do that. In fact, people use the word straw man, right? And that actually goes back to England when say, a man would go off, he'd be sent off to a war or something. Oftentimes, he would use his son to step in his place.
This has been used. This has been used even more recently within the USA after the Civil War. I think a lot of people think that the things that went on during and prior to the Civil War with slavery were such horrible acts, but they don't realize that the worst acts possible that happened to people happened after the Civil War during some of the reconstruction of the laws. Whereas, they would have like the sundowner laws and things of that nature. And if someone, I would say maybe of color, was caught, think about the sundowner laws, think about the name of it. If someone was caught, for instance, selling something after dark, okay, they're kind of looked at as the drug dealer on the street at night or something, you know what I mean? And those people, those guys would go and get maybe 10-year sentences in prison, and maybe, have to even, well, not maybe, they would end up being Now, slaves of the state and, working on the chain gangs and that kind of thing. And what would happen is
Mhm.
maybe a rich landowner would step forward and say, listen, I'll pay the sum certain or whatever costs are involved with the court case if you release that gentleman into my custody and he can come and work on my farm. And so that would be a case of subrogation there, where that prisoner he would, in a sense, be free. But now instead of working for the state, he's working for some rich landlord, and he would have a
Mhm.
contract with the guy. Hey, your sentence was 10 years. I got you out of there. How about if you work for me for 5 years? And that would take place then.
Well, and that's basically what the Messiah did, because like it says, you can serve two masters. You can serve man and their laws, or you can serve the laws of the righteous giver, the one lawgiver that there is. And that's it. And servitude to the Creator is basically working to further His kingdom by comprehending His laws and how to move the courts and to do what I was sent here to do. So that's a
Well,
great analogy, Brian.
all these things fall really under jurisdiction as well. And I've come across very many people who even ask me about jurisdiction. What's jurisdiction? It's new language, like you and I were talking prior to the recording. You start stumbling on some of these things in the beginning, and it's like learning a brand new language. And indeed, it really is. But if you go to
Mm-hmm.
Merriam-Webster's 1828 for jurisdiction, it's essentially the power, the right, or authority to interpret and apply the law. And it is the law of a sovereign power to govern or legislate. Now, in that definition, it says that it is the authority to interpret and apply the law. I would add to it, it's also the authority to write that law as well. And so with
Mm-hmm.
jurisdiction, you'll see different things. I mean, people should have learned jurisdiction watching Law and Order or something like that, where the sheriff's department is trying to investigate a crime, and in the steps, maybe the state police, and they want to take over jurisdiction. There comes. It's really in layers, and the best way to see it really
Mm-hmm.
is through rulership, because it mentions the rule of right, and
Mm-hmm.
your rulerships. You can see that in like the legislative bodies, starting like with your county board of commissioners and your mayor, and then you're going to go up higher to the state. You're going to have your governor, and then it goes up even higher to Congress and the president. So those are all different layers there of jurisdiction, or also suzerainty. I recommend people look up the word suzerainty, which is, I think, a
Mm-hmm.
more accurate word to use really rather than sovereignty, because that's an ultimate position. Um, I wanted to touch on the trial of Yeshua um, at the court with Pilate, because I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of
The,
things people could learn there. I mean, if people, you know, in my opinion, if you get dragged into court, it's because you've missed a step along the way somewhere. They really shouldn't want you there, and you really shouldn't have a position to even be there. But if you are, I think it's good to look at some of the court cases that you find within Scripture, and the trial of Jesus was an excellent one. Do you have some things that you've seen in that trial that you want to talk about, Elle, or no?
yeah, actually, that one, it took me a while actually to figure out, because when you were talking about jurisdiction, I really didn't comprehend jurisdiction to the depths that I do now until I met my friend Lex Mercatoria, who did the TJ Challenge. And then it became clear to me, like, who has the right to basically say, these are my laws that I get to enforce right here on this piece of land, and where their power comes from. And so what was interesting is that there were two different courts that were running, kind of like there are now, right? And one of them was an ecclesiastical court, and the other one was a civil court, because that's also biblical. It's laid out back in Deuteronomy. And what I found really interesting is the fact that, like, no one actually wanted to make any ruling or a decision in the case because they actually lacked jurisdiction. That's what stands out the most. In fact, I have a PDF that I think it was like 36 lawyers today went through and ripped apart how they broke every single one of their own laws in their jurisdiction when they actually brought him to trial. No one was allowed to be arrested at nighttime, to be tried at nighttime. You had to have two witnesses that have outstanding character. Didn't have that. They were supposed to have a public hearing. They held it privately, and then of course they shipped him off, right? And this guy's like, this is your religious stuff, which a lot of people I'd like to hear what you have to say, but I don't think a lot of people know that these courts out here are actually IRS determination. You can get an IRS determination. They're actually churches. They're 501c3s. So, it's not any different than it was then. But what are your thoughts, Brian?
Sorry. Yeah, well, that's why I call the courts the county temple, with the black robe priest there. Because I think that's just exactly what they are. They're collection points for U.S. Inc. And yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that nobody really wanted to be the one holding the hot potato when it came to the situation with Jesus, and Caiaphas, who was
I don't have jurisdiction.
Yeah, exactly, because they knew they didn't hold jurisdiction. So you had Caiaphas from the temple, the high priest, trying to pass it off to Pilate, and then Pilate trying to pass it off to Caiaphas. Incidentally, Caiaphas, it was his son-in-law, Agrippa, I believe, that was the one that tried the case with Paul. And when you read it now, you talk about dirty play. A lot of people want to say that the scripture is the inerrant word of God, and inherent means no error, nothing wrong, everything's exactly right. But we have to realize it was written by man, and it was written by men who wanted to slant things in their favor. Bottom line, it's just the way it is. And anybody that's heard me talk about Paul or any of these other things the past few weeks, might think, oh my God, he's an atheist. Or, you know what? I'll tell you what, my relationship with the Creator hasn't gotten stronger than it has since I've really started learning these things and studying it, because it starts making a lot of things make sense. Things that you think are contradictions in the Bible that you find really aren't contradictions. It's actually maybe referring to two different gods, which is even telling to you in the Bible. It's told to you that exists. But I found it interesting in the trial that one of the most famous situations there that people can recall would be Pilate washing his hands of the matter. And the interesting thing, right? The interesting thing, clean hands, right? Clean hands doctrine. Well, the interesting thing in clean hands is an equitable cause. But the thing with Pilate washing his hands is that Pilate was Roman. He was head of the Roman occupation there at the time. He was the one trying that case. And washing of hands was not a Roman practice. That was a Jewish practice. So if anybody there washed their hands of the matter, it would have been Caiaphas, because he was Jewish. Washing of hands would have been his custom, not the custom of the Romans or of Pilate. So right there you can see where there's a little tomfoolery going on in the writing of that story. And we should always keep our eye open for that kind of thing.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And I was going to say, as far as jurisdiction goes as well, I think the main types of jurisdiction people see in court today are personal, territorial, and subject matter jurisdiction. And there's additional ones that are used, and some of them even go into more really into federal court, but things like exclusive or appellate, original, diversity of jurisdiction, concurrent jurisdiction,
Yeah.
and general and limited jurisdiction. And I think it's interesting. A lot of people want to know, like, say that the phrase people throw around, status correction. What do I do? What do I correct? Well, just listen to a judge when they are first talking to a defendant, because he's going to tell you, or she's going to tell you, that judicial administrator will tell you what you need to correct, because they're going to ask you, you know, what is your residence? How long have you lived at this residence? Where do you work at? How long have you worked there? Do you have a bank account? Or pay taxes? They're going to ask you questions like that, and those things right there are setting up those three base points of jurisdiction that a judicial administrator has to establish: the personal jurisdiction, territorial, and subject matter. And so to me, I mean, so many of those things are right out there in our face, and somehow we miss them. But anyway, yeah, I thought that
Right.
the situation with Jesus was a good example with looking at equity and their jurisdiction.
Yeah, because they locked it up. That's why he had to be sent back, because there wasn't. That's why they didn't believe that anyone could come back from the dead, because most people think like he was a zombie. That's what I used to think. I'm like, who are these freaks with like this zombie guy? And but really, it has more to do being dead to the Creator, right? Because it says you have to be born of the water, which is commerce, and you have to be born again of the Spirit. Well, the spirit and soul of equity is equity. The spirit and soul of the law is equity. And as we go back to Psalms 9:8, it talks about equity. So one of the places that if people are interested in learning, I've mentioned books, but if you go to the Constitution of the state and start, because it took me a long time to realize, what are these judges doing? And of course, we have the Book of Judges in the back, right, after the king. What matters are they adjudicating? And the Constitution, like, I actually sent a message off to the Chief Justice and got a message back from the secretary. You can find which courts adjudicate. And really, equity is in every law form. And so it has more to do with studying what actually equity is, because it's a different form of law. It's like a whole different language. It's a whole different way of looking at how the world is actually truly ran. But you can find the rules of the court and who has the original jurisdiction and to adjudicate and stuff like that by looking at the Constitution of the state. So I do highly recommend that anyone, as far as equity goes, and I'm really thankful for the few men and women in men who have really just been like, just study the equity maxims, because all of the rest of the law stems from that, and they're binding. They bind the conscience of the judge, and it's the whole jurisprudence off of that. And archive.org has a lot of incredible books that you can download for free to read, and to start learning actually about the jurisprudence of equity, which isn't, it's statutory equity is running constantly. That's a lot of people, when they go into the courts today, they think that when they're reading a statute that's what's going on, but it's not really. That's not really what's going on. It's a form of Roman just civil equity that's running. But the biblical equity, I highly recommend studying the Bible, because equity maxims come from the Bible. There are cases that have been adjudicated. They just have to be able to be deciphered by comprehending. Like, the famous one that everyone gets is the woman who was accused of adultery, right? And the Messiah was sitting there, and he was holding court, and her accusers came, Hasatan in Hebrew means prosecuting attorney. So they brought her in to accuse her, and inside of equity and biblical law, the woman and her offspring are considered the property of the man, okay? Not property like I can abuse, but like precious commodity, to protect it. It's a trust relationship where the man has the legal title and the woman has the equitable title in the relationship. It's an executory contract, actually. But they were accusing her, and he said he was without sin cast the first stone, right? Well, basically, they're not allowed to benefit or bring a cause of action if they don't have clean hands, if they're guilty of fraud or the same crimes. And so no one was in a position, no one had, it doesn't expound on what they were guilty of, but they didn't have the right to bring a claim against her because they themselves had not followed the law. And so when he looks up, like probably had a hearing, right? Yeah, like an in camera, because he could see her. He's looking at her. He looks up and says, "Where are your accusers?" Right? And she's like, "Well, there's none here because they didn't have standing to bring a claim against her because they didn't have clean hands." And he said, "Well, I won't accuse you either." Now he could have. Because a judge does have the right sua sponte to make determinations based on the law they're adjudicating. But the Creator is very merciful and gracious and forgiving for accidents, mistakes, and fraud. And he's just said to her, just, go change your ways. Don't do it again. He granted grace, mercy.
Yeah, he said, neither do I accuse you.
Yeah, but he didn't. He chose to grant her mercy.
Mm-hmm.
And if people would just, get humble, there's a reason why these courts are here, and to ask for mercy. Like when you're accused of something, you're guilty, right? Breaking,
right.
Like how many people actually know the biblical law? How many? So automatically we probably trespass. So it says in the Bible to know, owe nothing to any man. Our duties and obligations are to our Creator and to follow His laws. And, most of the people standing in those courts are guilty of trespassing on the Creator's laws. So asking for mercy can go a long way if it's authentic. They're not just going to, but it's worked. It's worked for people.
I think a few years ago, if I remember right, it was Boris was actually talking about that situation at the well. And in the story, Yeshua kneels down and he starts writing something with his finger in the sand. But Scripture doesn't say what it was. And I remember, I think it was Boris, he just kind of hypothesized that maybe Yeshua was writing down the names of all the women that the accusers were guilty of being with.
Right. It could have been, yeah. And that's interesting you bring up well, too, because that's the other thing. The Bible at this point, it's they don't want commoners to be able to read it. So it's encoded, and it's a good way if you want to actually decode the Bible to get a Black's Law dictionary, and like you said, the Webster's, because Webster was the 1828, because he was a biblical scholar, and to hold them next to each other, because water isn't like H2O that you drink; it's a commodity. So whenever you hear about a well, living water, it's again nature and an allegory and how it relates to courts, right? So that's one of the things that I learned because I studied under this guy, Nehemiah Gordon, who's profound. He was raised a Karaite Jew, and he knows Hebrew. And so an idiom, like we say, I remember that by heart. Well, in Hebrew, what that means is putting it in your mouth. So anytime they're eating something, it means that they're remembering something. And I also didn't know that whenever someone goes into a contract, whether it's a covenant, whether it's a trust, whatever, that's referred to as eating together. So like the Last Supper, when he sat down and he distributed out his estate before they knew he was going to be prosecuted, he ate with them. So that's basically, he came to probably a meeting of the minds, an agreement, and a contract, right? Because then he granted the powers over to them for probably his estate,
And also at the same time, whenever it talks about the breaking of bread, I guess to use the word warfare is maybe a little severe, but it's maybe talking about they were coming to or talking about points of conflict is what that
Mm-hmm.
refers to when they talk about breaking of bread. So when people
That's
break
an
bread
interesting.
together, right? So when people are breaking bread together, they're coming together and saying, "Here, dude, I've got a problem. How are we going to work this out?" And they come to an agreement.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the interesting thing too. Like, because it was funny. Like right around the time that I first met you, I met Robert Michael, and I was like, it always says in the Bible, "Put your trust in me." I was like, I don't even know what a trust. I had no idea what a trust was. I just wanted one. And someone had invited me to his group, Truth and Trust, and we started interacting immediately. And so it took me a while to figure that out. And let's look at it like this: a trust, which is kind of what the covenant is, right? A trust has rules. It has laws, like in the Bible, and it's called the body of a trust is called the corpus. It's a body, and so oftentimes the transliteration and translators will say flesh when maybe it should say body, instead of just thinking like physically, right? Because the Hebrews know there are 4 levels of interpretation of the scriptures. And so when we're looking at it as a financial book, when you sometimes to eat, put in your mouth, right? Like you remember, you eat the flesh, maybe it's eating the body of the actual trust, what's written in it, maybe not being actual cannibal. You know what I'm saying?
Right. That's the
Yeah.
usufruct. That's the right of use, the use of the res or the property of the trust.
Yeah, that's where you get into the fruits of the spirit, right? The usufruct. It's yes.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think and there's even scripture's just packed full of so much stuff like that. That if we realize a lot of these code words, in fact, I recommend people, get a little book or something and write down some of these code words so that when you're going through scripture, you can look at those other code words and see whether or not they fit. And very often it'll start making some different scriptures make a whole lot more sense than they made before.
Exactly. I actually write it in the Bible. My Bible, I'll write it in there. One of the biggest ones, there were 2 words that like absolutely changed my whole comprehension, right, of the Bible. So like, you hear about acts and deeds, right? When I started to learn about land conveyances, inheritances and stuff like that, I'm like, hey, this is a deed. This is an actual deed like they record at the county, right? That was a huge epiphany. And the other one is anytime when you look up the etymology of the word faith, it means trust. It actually is a trust. And it has
Yep.
members, covenantal members. We're supposed to be in covenantal relationship with our Creator who gave us the rules, the laws to live in a righteous, holy society where our bodies are clean, our relationships are good, how we interact with the world is peaceful and prosperous. Mm-hmm. So those words really, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. The Bible's
I,
so cool, man. It talks about crystals and essential oils and high tech. And just one more thing real quick, Brian. So,
Spikenard. I love my spikenard.
yeah, yeah, right. So the book of Revelation, right? So when you start to realize, okay, this book is about law, it's about equity, it's about court hearings, and you got your judges. Well, you hear about seals, right? Well, that was private. It's put under seal. What did Messiah do? He ripped all those seals off in the book of Revelation. And every time he ripped a seal off, a plague happens, right? And the seals, private seals. And anyone who has been into any kind of equity hearing knows that sometimes it's put under seal. What was there, 7 seals that he ripped out? He had to rip apart to come out of the tomb?
Right.
There's 7 of them. Yep, probably in probate. I'm just going to say that out loud.
Well, I had an interesting conversation with Micah Dank today about something that I've had in the back of my mind for a while. And last night I started looking up scriptures, and they were all just falling right in place with the idea that I had in my mind, because we know so much of this comes really
Mhm.
out of Egypt as well, because before Rome went into Jerusalem, they had first gone into Egypt. And then from Egypt,
Mhm.
they went into Jerusalem. And you'll notice that cultures will always pick up little bits and pieces of other cultures that they take over. If you look today, take a look at the Vatican and look at the Pope, and there's a lot of Roman symbology, that came from Egypt and that came from Jerusalem, right down to the little skull cap
Mhm.
that he wears. That skull cap, that little round disc
Yeah.
they wear on their head. It's called a skull cap actually because it used to actually be a piece of a actual skull, and that they would go and
Cool.
drink maybe their communion or whatever out of it. Anyway, I was talking to
Yeah.
Mike Dank, and I was talking about that you read that God's throne is in the north. It's in the heavens. It's above us, and the earth is His footstool.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
you stop and position yourself at the throne of God, looking down at earth, and look at what the sun does. It comes up from the east. Now, in Hebrew, that word east means essentially the beginning. All right, that's what
Mhm.
the word for
Mhm.
east meant, is the beginning. That's why it's used for Eden and east of Eden. And the sun,
Mhm.
sun or son, because the sun for Egypt was a god to them. So the sun comes up in the east, which would have been coming from the left hand side of the throne and passing by, doing its work that the sun, sun or son, was to do during its time. And then it goes down, it sets in the west, it sets on the right hand side of the throne.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
just find little
Well,
things like that
that's
pretty fascinating.
yeah. I love Micah Dank's work, man. Absolutely love it. But it's interesting about equity too. The woman at the well, the woman that was actually at the well, she's like, he told me everything about my life. He knew everything, right? Like he has her whole life. He has the file to her entire life, everything she's done because of the watchers, right? They watch us all. And the cool thing about equity courts is they can move, imagine it's heavenly right up above, right? It's the highest, it's spiritual, ecclesiastical law, right? The equity courts can reach down and they rip out the heart because a lot of fraud happens in these other courts. It's not what's fair, right, and just. It's all technicalities. That's Roman by nature. Procedures and technicalities, and you got to have your seals. And equity is not like that. Equity is like, it doesn't matter about the name, it's about the substance, right? Which they
Right.
know who we are based on our blood. But equity is super cool because it can look and peer into the law, but the law can't peer into what equity is doing. And so that's another allegory when I think about that. Like when we think about jurisdictions of law, the heavenly law, at least here in the realm, would be, inherent ecclesiastical equity, perfected equity, which is what Messiah did. And it looks down on the earth because the earth, is often an allegory for flesh, which is cardinal, which isn't the man or man being man and woman, who have spiritually ascended to realize really that this is a spiritual training ground and who we are and what we're supposed to actually be doing.
Absolutely. And,
So,
it's as far as form and substance, to give people maybe a visual idea of form and substance. And I'll use like the birth certificate, for instance, because this is something that has been said many times, is totally untrue. And, they talk about, oh, copyright, the crown's got a copyright on the birth certificate. And therefore they've got a copyright on your name. Here's the thing. Here's a visual to comprehend form and substance. That birth certificate, that form, was blank at one time. When it was created to be blank because copies of that would hold information on lots of different things that were going to be happening into the future that were all fairly unrelated to each other. And so whoever drew up that form, that document, that blank document, they held a copyright over that blank document. Now, later on, information was written onto that blank document, and that information that was written onto it is substance. All right. So there's the two differences visually between form and substance. Now, the copyright holder held a copyright on that blank form that they created to be used multiple times into the future for multiple different situations. But they did not hold copyright to the substance that would be written onto it in the future. That's not the way copyright law works. So there's just kind of an example there of form and substance. And so, yeah, the equity looks more at the substance than it does at the form. And with equity, people need to realize, people go into court and they walk away saying, oh, something was right, or they say something was wrong. And most of the time they're bitching because something was wrong. But they don't realize that the courts don't look at right or wrong. They look at what's legal or illegal. And in the same way, equity doesn't necessarily look at moral and immoral. Equity looks at what is fair or what is impartial. Because what is fair to one person might not be fair to the other. And so you've got the magistrate that stands there and kind of gives an overview of the situation and makes a determination from there. One of the things a lot of people, I think, ask is invoking equity in court. And myself, I think if I were to go into court over a matter and I wanted it to be done through equity, and I might do it, as a moving party, I would probably do it as one of the forms that we know that are equitable, whether it's declaratory judgment, estoppel, doctrinal lashes, or a suit in partition, something like that. And if I'm invoking one of those equitable means, then I know it would be equitable proceeding moving forward, or it should be. How would you recommend to people to invoke equity in court?
Okay, so first of all, I don't give any legal advice, but what I would say is that
I only give illegal advice, FYI.
Yeah, well, lawful. Okay. Yeah, okay, so exactly. Well, so first of all, the court is the paperwork, and so it depends on the pleadings, right? Because equity can only adjudicate, whatever the word adjudicate, it can only look at it, and it only has the power, the jurisdiction, to adjudicate. There's 33 children of equity, okay? And so if someone is bringing a cause of action, the paperwork that they fill out, it's going to have to reflect that, so that when the clerk, whether you're sending it in privately or the clerk is looking at it, there has to be equities on the face of it. So if it's like you're just trying to get some money or whatever, they're going to be like, yeah, there's an adequate remedy at law. We're going to toss you over here in a civil hearing. Now, equity only deals with property rights. That's it, property rights. And it's a different perspective. I highly, highly, highly recommend. I read this the other night. You might have heard me on that small call we had about comprehending how equity looks at what property rights are. Because, see, equity is the foundation of creation of the righteous king, and then the Messiah was walking, talking equity. So what are the rights? Do I have the right to move around? Do I have the right to my sense of smell? Do I have the right to work? Do I have the right to my person? Wait, is that my person or is that the state's person? You know what I'm saying? So in order to he who seeks equity must do equity. So you got to do what's fair, right, and just, and conduct yourself in a way that's equitable. Like if you're going to bring a suit, you got to give them notice of intention. You can't just ambush someone. You can't be going in and being guilty of the same thing. Like I stole a car and then this guy stole the car from me. You don't have clean hands there. So you have to, like, on the face of it, and most of the time, you're looking at petitions or bills as opposed to complaints. And so it really just depends on what you're putting in there. And, that's a treatise on suits and chanceries. You can wrap your head around that to begin with. I mean, I've been pounding at that book for a while. I'm just now really starting to get it. So that's what I would say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have
to
to
get
have
what's fair, right, and just.
exactly. You have
Mm-hmm.
to have clean hands. You can't come forward and say, "Oh, I know who robbed the bank. I know for sure who robbed the bank. You know how? Because I drove the getaway car." Yeah, that doesn't work.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to add a couple more things, if you don't mind. So you said the birth certificate. Okay, those were considered unconstitutional a long time ago. It's the Towner Act. I think it's called the Towner-Shepard Act. People should go back and read that stuff. But people used to keep their private records in their family Bible. Private. In fact, the definition in Black's Law of a family Bible is where you have all your major family events. When someone's born, when someone dies, when they have babies, and that, right? Certificates are issued by trusts. That's what they are. And if you go into United States Code 5, you'll see who issues those birth certificates. And the premise, and you know that I have so much gratitude to the man KW, because I was doing so much research, and he took my research to a deeper level. And I'm so thankful for the research that he brought forth, because it really helps me to comprehend, probate courts. Like my one girlfriend, Lisa, I love her. She has proof that anytime a birth certificate is issued, that a probate case opens. And a probate is proving of wills. And in the Bible it says, I'm here to do the will of my Father. All these men over here, they want to do their will, they want to do what they think, but I'm here to do the will of my Father who's in heaven. So I wanted to throw those little ideas out there so that hopefully spiritually that will, it'll hit someone in the right spot and like motivate them to get into equity and reach out to us, because I'm so excited. I'm so thankful for the Creator. It's so nice to finally find the law form, the rules. Like, this is how we're supposed to operate. It's so beautiful. If people just it's kind of weird though, like when I first started reading the Bible, it's like, I don't even have an ox. Why do I care about this ox if my ox falls into a ditch? And then I got to the principle. So that like the law of restitution, right? So when you look at how the state operates, you ever notice the victim doesn't get paid anything? It's the state. I wonder if it has to do with I wonder if that's because someone claims that you're a part of their parents' patriae family with that certificate. Just saying.
Right, because you're operating their person, and it was supposedly their person that was harmed, and so therefore they get paid back. I think it's interesting you mentioned the word father. I had just maybe a short little epiphany. I don't know, but the scripture says to do all things in my name, right? And Yeshua said, "I'm here to do the will of my Father." Well, if it says, call no man your father, well, why is that? Well, because if you're going to say that I'm here doing the will of my Father, you don't want any ambiguity as to who that is, because there is only one entity you call your Father.
And people inherit from their father. And that's why, like you said, it says, you don't call any man on the earth Father. You only have one, and he's in heaven, right?
Right.
And, it's really, really actually interesting. And it actually, as far as doing things in the name and how that goes back to equity. So the chancellors, when they would issue writs, so what would happen is the king would hand over his conscience, like what was conscience, to adjudicate matters, to the chancellor, and the chancellor would do the writ in the name of the king. And as we know that Jesus, the Messiah, Yeshua, he was a king, truly. And we're still operating under Samuel 8:1. There's still kingdoms. They've obfuscated it. They're still kingdoms, and the kings rule by their rules. And so that's why he said to do everything in my name, because that's where we get our power from our Creator, when we are adjudicating, when we're bringing his laws and saying, wait a second, hold up. The state of Ohio doesn't have a vagina. It doesn't own me. Like, I'm a spiritual being. Jeremiah 1:5, I knew you before I formed you and brought you forth from the belly, ordained and sanctified to preach unto the nations. And that's, if you want to map that to the UCC, that's a holder in due course. It's called a paramount claim. Because the real substance, as the Bible says over and over again, don't eat blood. Do not eat blood. The life force is in the blood. And we all know about the codes, the RNA and the DNA. So that birth certificate is actually, and it's all biblical, it's all based on the blood covenant. That was the first one, and it was always the first one. Who's claiming it? And of course, now that we're back to the times of Noah and reading the book of Enoch, where they are literally taking the blood of men and women and trees and frogs and sharks and who knows what else, and they're mingling it. And then they're making a claim because they don't have the creative force to create. They just have the way to alter it and make a claim to it. And that goes along with the biological warfare that they're injecting into people right now, too. Anyway.
Well, this even is put right in front of our face. I remember seeing a bloodmobile from the Red Cross, and down the side of it, it said, "There is power in the blood." Well, what you're really talking about too is you're invoking your jurisdiction, because when it comes down to jurisdiction, you need to invoke yours, and so when you're invoking that, you're showing where your power comes from, and where you're calling it out from as well.
You're right, Brian. In fact, looking at bills in equity, there's a jurisdictional clause that's a part of the bill or the petition where you state this is the reason why this court has jurisdiction to adjudicate this matter, to actually listen to it and make a ruling over it, right? And we walk around handing out jurisdiction. We have to bring our law. That's why people say, the people are sovereign. Okay, well, maybe if they're in suzerainty with the creator of all, right, whose law, of course, is the highest jurisdiction, they have that choice. And not sovereign, it's suzerainty, right? Like you said, you can in fealty to the King of Kings. And we bring, and that's what the courts match. So, like, if someone's writing out a pleading, you bring in a cause of action, like someone hit my car, and, I'm trying to get compensation. It depends on the laws. So sometimes people will put constitutions in there, and they'll do UCC 1308 or revised codes of whatever, or code of federal regulations. And when someone cites the Bible, the different authors, it's just like doing that. So Jeremiah 1:5, there's my law. Argue with it, because it passes. And that's the federal rules of evidence, too. There's the hearsay clause. So any document that's over 21 years, go figure, can be accepted. It gets through the exception clause for the hearsay rules.
And you don't want to invoke like United States Code and UCC, and then skip over to a passage in Psalms or Daniel, and then flip back again. No. Yeah. If you have one form of law, you have one form of law, and you stick with it, period. Otherwise, you're going to be looked at as insane.
Unless you do it the way the Messiah did. I really liked his example, because he said, have you not read in the scriptures here, right? And does it not say in your own law? So basically what he does is when he was finding that they were out of line, he was coming in at the highest, right? I'm bringing the highest right here. But then in yours, it also says this, and you're in conflict with that. As opposed to commingling, it has to be very clearly delineated. Like, this is where I'm coming from, which that's scriptures and equity maxims. And these are your laws that you are in violation of as well.
Exactly. Commingling is probably one of the highest forms of sin in today's realm as well. Well, we've gone right
Well, that's
over
why
our
we
hour
have
mark.
to. I could go on. Thank you so much,
I know.
Brian. I
I
love
know you
talking about
could.
this. I really, I really hope that we, through this talk, inspire people to really look at the jurisprudence of equity and pick up the Bible and throw out all the stuff they taught you before and be like, I'm reading a law book, I'm reading about inheritance, I'm reading about estates, trusts, surety, wills, all of that.
Absolutely. And like I said, I'll get this uploaded to YouTube this evening. And if anybody, and I'm sure they will, and I'm sure we will have Elle back again, just make a comment in the section there on YouTube. Let us know what you thought. And if you have any specific things that you would like her or I to cover in the future, mention those as well. But like I tell people, or try to remember to tell people every week, that if you really want to start learning and really want to figure out a starting point for yourself, you need to learn three basic things. We need to learn who we really are, where we really come from, and where we're really at, because those are the three things that we've mainly been deceived on. Thanks, El.
Well, thanks, Brian. Hallelujah.
And we have you back on again, and I will try and open things up maybe for Q&A. We didn't really run into time for that this evening, but I'm sure a lot of people will have things maybe they want to ask about. So if that's the case, we'll do that maybe in a part two. How does that sound?
That sounds good, Brian.
Beautiful. Everybody have a wonderful week. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Brian. Bless you.
Thanks, guys. Good night.